Bonus episode 8.5, part 3, Finding Meaning.
You're listening to Guns Guide to Liberals, the podcast where we explore ideas and techniques that help you break down partisan barriers, build rapport across the aisle, and make a more persuasive case for the Second Amendment. I'm John Hauptman.
And I'm Sarah Hauptman. This is the last episode from our roundtable discussion at SHOT Show with Chuck Rossi and BJ Campbell from Open Source Defense and Douglas Jefferson, the Vice President of the National African American Gun Association.
This episode gets a little bit deep as our guests talk about how people's identities are shaped by the burdens they bear. We ask them what keeps them going, and their answers are powerful and deeply personal.
Before we start, I want to point out some links in our show notes. The first one is to an article by BJ Campbell in which he reframes so-called gun deaths in an interesting way, as a men's health crisis. Here's a quote from that article.
The overwhelming problem with gun deaths is gun suicides. And the overwhelming problem with gun suicides is men in their professional years, aged 25 to 64. Men between those age ranges intentionally taking their own lives, in their own homes, constitute 37% of the entire body of all firearms deaths.
So this didn't actually come up in our round table, but I wanted to talk about it now because it's important. I've noticed that the gun community has been a lot more open about talking about mental health and suicide lately, and I think that's awesome. We need to be able to speak openly about mental health. We've all either been there or we know someone who's struggling, and we can make a difference in their lives. The conversations we're having and the communities we're building are a critical step in that process.
If you or a friend are having problems, or if you're concerned a friend might be suicidal, it's okay to talk about it openly and directly. Check the show notes for guidelines on what to say and how to have those conversations. You can also review our previous episodes for soft skills that will help you get better at difficult conversations. In particular, check out the non-judgmental listening skills from episode 2 and the values reflection skills from episode 4.
So here's the background for the last segment of our roundtable. We were talking about the breakdown of all firearms-related deaths and how the majority of them are suicides. We talk about how some of the social and cultural factors driving those deaths can't be legislated, but that doesn't mean we can't have an impact. We talk about how we find meaning and how we move forward with the burdens we bear.
Only a couple thousand people a year, right, in terms of deaths. The larger idea space encapsulates all the rest of those deaths and other bigger problems, right? And that is knitting communities together. And a lot of that, some of it, I think, just can't even be tackled with law. You know, we need people to act right. You know, when you talk about male suicide, okay, I don't have numbers for this, and I'll just speak personally. And I usually don't speak personally about my stuff when I usually stick to things I can defend. But I think there's a meaning crisis among the males in this country. I think that men, this is from my personal experience struggling with my wife's cancer, men gain meaning to their life by bearing burdens. And when you put a burden on your shoulders and you carry it up the hill, that gives meaning to your life. And when you have no burdens to bear, you're off in space. I think that kind of stuff might be in play here, and I don't know how you legislate that, but that's only an opinion, right? And everybody's got their own different opinions. And so I'm not gonna die on that hill defending it, but I think that there's a lot of stuff going on in that space right now in the United States that has to do with just the culture of men. And I mean, like, if you're 35 years old and all you ever done is play Fortnite, you know, yeah, I can imagine you have a real personal crisis there, you know? Because you've never put things on your shoulders, you've never carried that burden, you've never, you know. So, but that's just my opinion too. You know, like, in order to figure, suicide is the worst because you can't go and poll people about why they killed themselves because they're not around to answer the damn poll.
So we were talking about burdens, and there are a lot of people who are involved in, who are suffering in environments where there's high levels of violence and suicide, and they're existing in those conditions, and they're existing with burdens. And I think one of the problems is that when you're bearing a burden, there needs to be some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And we're all kind of engaged in this fairly similar struggle. And a lot of people are struggling in the culture war or bearing some burden of trying to convince people of things. And what we need to do is have some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, some sort of incentive structure or some goal to work towards that makes the burden worth it. And let's have a little talk about like what's worth it, where are we going, how can we be encouraging?
So for me, being on the leadership team for National African American Gun Association, being the vice president, I mean, for being leadership for any organization, that there's the burden of having the vision and really figuring out how to engage with, generate value for, and really be true advocates for the people of that organization. And for me, what really makes the burden bearable is seeing when I bring people into the organization and I bring them into that history and really connecting them to it in a way that they're just another link in the chain of a very long tradition, and seeing how like them owning that, like that's really satisfying. Because I know now at that point, like this person is going to be a lifelong advocate because it makes real value in their lives. And then they can speak of that value that it makes in their lives from a place of genuineness. And that's one of the things that I love seeing the organization and with the people I work with. So, my story is the story, that link in the chain is going back to that civil rights movement, back to all the way back to the slave rebellions in the South, right? Coming up from 1619 forward, through the Civil War, through through Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, being able to have those conversations with my grandfather, and tell him about those times which are, within living memory, that's my experience. And so there's another person I work with in the organization, really dear friend of mine, who is the president of the Atlanta chapter. He comes from a very different experience. So he's a first generation American. His parents were immigrants from Haiti, and he grew up in New Jersey during the 70s and 80s. So right into that, war on drugs, into that crack epidemic. And so his story and his connection through the Second Amendment is the fact, and he's very honest about this, and I appreciate honesty because it's that genuineness, is that regardless of what those gun laws were at the time, where nobody could have firearms or was supposed to own them, the criminals had them, and he had them, and his family members had them, and his friends had them, because they had to deal with that criminal element, because the police at the time were not respecting the black community. They were not supporting or accountable to the black community. So you had to protect yourself. You had to be your own 911. And even though his parents were, very much anti-gun, they were also very practical people, because they've got to go out and live in that environment, And so he speaks from that standpoint, where in order to live and survive, they had to become, basically he had to become a criminal through fiat, right? Now thank God that he was never, arrested, and caught for something like that, because, he had no intention of robbing, raping, killing, stealing, doing any sort of crime. It was just simply to protect himself and be able to protect, those within his family circle, right? That's another, angle that they're coming from, because in his area, you had a very strong, Black Panther presence, and they would go out with farms and say, hey, look, we're going to guard our communities because, once again, the government is not there to protect us, right? The government is in many ways acts as a direct adversary to us, right? An impediment to us being able to protect ourselves and live and have, a life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so that's his history, and that's how he sees himself as a link in the chain, and that's the story he tells his children, he tells other members. So we have very different experiences, but we can both connect to that history. So once again, just being able to engender that and really empower people with that history and show them not standing alone, but they're standing on the shoulders of others that have fought and sacrificed before them. That's what makes it rewarding for me to bear the burden.
Yeah, so the meaning is contagious.
Absolutely.
To your question about burden, John, for me, I felt it very personally because, going back to the Facebook experience, I really felt like the single person with this burden on my back of all the gun content, the businesses, everyone on Facebook who was suffering under these false positives and just bad decisions is really wears you down. And I was very passionate about Facebook. I bleed Facebook blue for the 11 years I was there. And to see the platform being used incorrectly and us doing poor things to people who are in the right and have their businesses just gone, decimated. And to the point where they're sending me messages saying I have to lay off my staff of 5 for my little meme business or my page or my small business because you guys took down my stuff and I can't get back on. And that weighs on you. Yeah, there's 2 billion people on the platform, but Jim Andrews in St. Louis, Missouri he's suffering tonight because I can't fix this, right? And all the Second Amendment people who were suffering and going through our time, and I'm the only person inside who cares. And I go in every day to kind of push this forward, but there's no support. And again, you're this little drop of water in this avalanche, this huge tsunami of just bad things that had to be addressed and taken care of. That definitely wore on me. And the thing that saved me after about 2 years of doing this, and maybe I'll tell you sometime about some of the people who sent in stuff. I had a group of children actually they were adults in a Florida development home who used a Facebook page to do share things with each other, and they had this little community of Facebook page, and it got taken down because one of the creators of the Facebook page got tied up because he made 2 accounts or some baloney, and Facebook was going. He was probably doing stuff that was bumped up against a lot of our policies, but it was relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. And we nuked his page completely. We nuked his profile completely. It's like you can never have a Facebook page again, and all the pages that you own are gone. And one by association was this development group in Florida. And I tried and I couldn't get the policy. And Facebook is really so paranoid about employees doing too much or stepping over bounds or looking at personal data. They protect personal data very seriously. And I couldn't get things resolved to my satisfaction. And about 2 days later in the mail, I get this huge FedEx box addressed to me at Facebook, which could be a red flag because I'm not making a lot of friends sometimes. So apparently I got through the scanner, so it's not going to blow up in my face. And I opened it, and it was a pack, 3 inches thick of hand-drawn pleading, apologies. What did we do? Or sorry, can we have our page back? Of all, little pictures and such. It was heartbreaking. To have this stack, 3 inches tall of every person in this group, just devastated because they lost their community, which was the whole point of the platform, which was Zuck's point for the platform. So, that sucked. I was able to get the page back in the end, but that was, there was a lot of examples like that. It's traumatic. What saved me was actually finding the open source defense guys. And finally I had a group of people who are in situations in tech and various professional, jobs and organizations that I could relate to and I could say these stories to and knew that there was someone else out there who was fighting this fight and it was worth it. So that I'm so positive about open source defense because, I didn't find any place else where I could have these discussions and do these things. So the other thing that really saved me was, and this goes to Douglas's point, man, taking people out to the range and engaging them. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. And I've done it literally for thousands of people, organized in big groups.
Who's our friend that says you can't take people to the end? Who's our friend that says,
Tam.
Oh yeah, our friend Tamara says You can't take people to the anti-gun range.
I love that.
Tamara Keel writes for Shooting Illustrated in Recoil, I think.
Totally stealing that. And that's mine.
You
now.
can't collect anti-guns, and you can't take people to the anti-gun range.
That is awesome. So that's so true. And, just doing that. And so this is the encouraging part, right? So I have open source defense. I have an outlet to do encouraging things. I have this thing called Civil Shield that is just starting up in Northern California by a libertarian friend of mine, and he roped me into it against my will. And now we're like,
that's not very libertarian.
I know. It's like, you're a fascist. Ah. So now I'm a good instructor. I'm a good beginner instructor for sure. And once a month.
But you're being detained.
I am being detained. Am I being detained? Am I here against my will? Am I free to go? So we are taking people once a month in groups of up to 10 at a time. People have never seen a gun before, usually from very blue, because I'm in San Francisco Bay Area. And we're taking them every month, once a month on schedule, and they sign up. And we got a little website, and we're basically charging them $20 for hundreds of dollars worth of instruction and equipment. So there's a little outlet where you feel good at the end of the day because, hey, I made an impact. I did something, and I'll continue to do that. So that's a good thing. And just finally, we have at Open Source Defense, one of the things we talk about is man, don't be an unpopular minority. History has not been kind to unpopular minorities. Gun owners are quickly becoming unpopular minorities, right? And so we have two axes to work with here. We discussed a lot of them here. One, be more popular, right? And two, don't be a minority. Get more gun owners. Get a better view of what we do out in the world. Get more popular and get more people. So those are kind of two of the founding principles of what we're up to and why we're doing what we're doing. And that's it. We're not looking for fundraising. We're not looking for, anything for lobbying. We are like getting good stuff in front of people, and we want to make more gun owners, and we want to make more popular gun owners. So there's the positive part for, at least for me, and why we're spreading the word.
Your question is a tough one for me. Personally, my wife passed away in April of 2019. And the thing that got me through that, she had cancer for 2 years. The thing that got me through it was this burden concept, right? It's just like the next thing that hit me, fine, put it on my shoulders. I'll be a man. I'll carry the burden. And that's how I got through it, right? And when she passed away, I mean, grief and everything like that. It's like, you don't ever, there's no practicing that. There's no preparing for it. You think you're ready and you're not. And, but the experience, I think, gave me stronger shoulders to carry burdens, right? And now I've got plenty. I'm a single father with 2 elementary school kids. And the distraction that I chose from the chaos landed me on things like a SHOT Show podcast, right? And this guy sitting to my right talking about how great open source defense has been to him. And I'm a piece of that, right? And what burdens do you, like, what do you live for? This is the kind of thing you think about when you're you're depressed and you're grieving and that kind of thing. What do you live for? This is kind of the spark of the question, like if you have nothing to live for, you're more likely to commit suicide, right? This is why we're talking about this crap. Being a positive element in Chuck's life is something to do. And being a positive father is something to do. And I got a lot of people like writing my articles, like reading them. And so maybe I'll write more. I want to release another album this year. I was doing music a lot before my wife got cancer, and then I just kind of bailed on it. And, for me, it's a hard question to answer because I don't know the answer yet, right? I'm still kind of swimming. But I think that the spaces that I'm in, I can make a positive impact to the people around me. And I think that's all that you can really ever ask anybody to do. And so I guess I'm just going to keep doing that. And that's about all I got for that question,
Yeah. I mean, if meaningfulness is contagious several ways. So if you're engaged in something and it winds up having more meaning for someone adjacent to you than it does for you, their experience of meaningfulness will, ricochet back on you. It'll, the meaningfulness kind of splashes back a little bit. So
I think that's what makes strong cultures. Yep. And I think that, I don't know, is this me spreading anxiety by saying that I think our current culture in the United States might have lost some of that? We talked about, hand-waving freak-outery. Am I spreading it all by saying that I think we might be getting a little bit frayed at the edges around here in the United States? I don't know. All you can really do is just kind of pick up the pieces around you and carry them into tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of that. Maybe dating myself here, but what's your anti-drug? Do you remember that campaign?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're like, what's your anti-drug? Mine is. But no, mine's similar to yours. It's building community and it's finding meaning. And for me, I find a lot of meaning in personal relationships and in being a good person for others. So I think, there's some elements there that kind of are the anti-drug to this political polarization that's kind of tearing our culture apart.
Yeah, and you never know what mundane, and you never know what thing you're doing that feels mundane to you that is actually really inspiring to somebody else, and it's important to not just sort of reject and poo-poo that when someone points it out to you. When someone says, you're doing something that I find really inspiring, even though it's something that you take for granted or is mundane, you should probably have enough respect for them and their opinion that you reframe it a little bit for yourself.
Well, let's go ahead and bring, Facebook and Chuck back into the fold here instead of trashing him. There is very real value in one of the things that you just said, is that you never know what thing that you're doing is going to inspire someone else. And I think that, as much as we might like to trash on Facebook, I think that that's a feature. It's a huge feature of that platform, right? And they need to be congratulated for providing that element, because, if there wasn't that contribution to it, things might be worse.
This is a huge breakthrough for you, BJ, to give that kind of accolades to Facebook. I think we're onto something here. We're going to have another podcast just on the Facebook effect here and your new embrace of the modern platform.
I wouldn't say it's new. I would just say, I don't know. Let's talk about that later.
When you said new embrace, I heard Emperor Palpatine for just a second.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your time and for your insight.
Yeah. Well, how long was this podcast? Did we just do 4 hours of podcast?
Good luck editing.
Hey.
It's all right. It's okay. You've been listening to Gun's Guide to Liberals, the last bonus episode from our roundtable discussion with Chuck Rossi, BJ Campbell, and Douglas Jefferson.
Next week, we're going back to our regularly scheduled content. In upcoming episodes, we're going to talk about written communication, including why, when, and how to argue online.
That's something people have been asking us about for a while, but we put it last in the mini-series because we think it's last in order of importance and impact. Generally speaking, we think in-person conversations are much more valuable. That said, online and written conversations are still a useful part of our larger strategy of relationship-based activism.
In the future, we'll talk about communicating with politicians and influencing legislation. Thanks for listening. Well, what we should do is leave like maybe 15 or 20 seconds of just dead air so we can use that as like a baseline for noise reduction.
That sounds good. Let's do that.
Pretty good timing you got in there, man.
I was wondering what we were going to do about our theme music.
That's a good reminder. So what do you normally do for
that was
clip this
very well timed.
Yeah.
Go ahead and give the intro.